Good morning and welcome everyone. As stated, today's talk is on the mystery of individuality. It is a very vast subject. It can only be addressed from one viewpoint today, but perhaps in the future we will pick up the thread and address it from other viewpoints. It is very imperative to keep in mind this this geometrical figure that was put on the board last week, that this is the universe in rest, this in activity, and all of its parts are inclusive in that circle. Humanity also is part of that circle. All the other kingdoms of nature is also part of that circle. There is no separation in this at all. So when we discuss the philosophy, we're just looking at it from a perspective, but we need to keep in mind that there is no separation of anything from anything else. We are all in it in unity. So having said that, we will look at the monad when it is in the lower kingdoms, and then the life wave moves into the human kingdom, because this is when we obtain individuality. It is stated here that humanity at this stage is still in its childhood for some, adulthood for others, and when we reach that state, what is it that we show as our characteristics? And from then on, we move into the divine life, which is what the future holds for humanity, because we are perfectible. When we go to the secret doctrine, HPB says, metaphysically speaking, it is of course an absurdity to talk of the development of the monad, to say that it becomes man, because the monad does not become anything. The monad is a monad. It goes through the life wave. As a life wave, it goes through, and on 289, page 289, continuing on to 93, we are told what this life wave does. It says here on page 291, the first is the mother, prima materia, separating itself into its primary 7 states. It proceeds down cyclically. When having consolidated itself in its last principle as gross matter, it revolves around itself and informs with the 7th emanation of the last, the first and the lowest element. This is the serpent biting its tail. In a hierarchy or order of being, the 7th emanation of her last principle is 1. In the mineral, the spark that lies latent in it and is called to its evanescent being by the positive awakening the negative, polarity. Mineral kingdom receives polarity from it. In the plant, it is that vital and intelligent force which informs the seed and develops it into the blade of grass or the root or sapling. So what does it give to the plant? Vitality and intelligence. Plants have an intelligence of their own kind, and they have a feeling of their own kind. In every animal, it does the same. In other words, what it has given to the mineral and the plant also exists in the animal, but it adds another principle to it. It is its life principle and vital power, instinct and qualities, characteristics, and special idiosyncrasies. Because a lion and a dove are not the same, are they? By knowing what the animal is, we can define its characteristics. But to all of the kingdom, it gives a vital power and instinct. Animals conduct themselves according to instinct. To men, it gives all that it bestows on all the rest of the manifested units, but develops furthermore the reflection of all its 49 fires in him. This is consciousness. So, we will refer to this article over and over again, but that also we must keep in mind, that in the human, all of these principles exist. These are just general comments, and then we will move on. And she tells us again in the Secret Doctrine that the monad never was, never will be, and never can be fully imprisoned in the lower kingdoms. A monad is a monad. It just has a different expression in each of the kingdoms. So, one principle in the mineral, 2 plant, 3 animal. Man has all of that plus the 49 fires. There's a very good article by Mr. Judge in his explanations of mind and action, and I wish that you would all please read that. It says again, the monad or jiva per se cannot be even called a spirit. It is a ray, a breath of the absolute, or the absoluteness rather, and the absolute homogeneity having no relations with the conditioned and relative finiteness is unconscious on our plane. I will put it on the board at the end. Again, Secret Doctrine. Owing to its identity with the all-force, which is inherent in the monad, it is all-potent on the arupa, formless plane. On our plane, its essence being too pure, it remains all potential, but individually becomes inactive. The spiritual monad could never dwell in such a form otherwise than in an absolutely latent state. Then she goes on to tell us, the lunar monads cannot progress, for they have not yet had sufficient touch with the forms created by nature to allow of their accumulating experiences through its means. It is the Manasa Dhyanis who fill up the gap, and they represent the evolutionary power of intelligence and mind, the link between a spirit and matter in this round. So, the lower kingdoms then can never by itself, without assistance from these mind lords, reach to the higher estate. The lower cannot reach to the higher estate without assistance, and we need to keep that in mind as well. And she goes on to tell us the highest sees through the eyes of the lowest in the manifested world. Purusha, which is a spirit, remains blind without the help of Prakriti, which is matter, in the material spheres, and so does Atma Buddhi without Manas. So, the highest in us then gets in contact with the physical or material world through manas. So there are two kinds of monads from this explanation. One of them is Atma Buddhi, which is latent. And the other one is Atma Buddhi Manas, manas expressed. It is partial, but nevertheless it is expressed, because only through manas can the monad express itself. So we are all in two stages, and the monad can never be anything less. It's these two, nothing less. If manas alone of the higher triad is to some degree incarnated in our race, and Atma Buddhi is available to us solely through manas, how can it ever be imagined that the monad can reach below the plane of the mind? Plane of the mind. This is very important to remember. As the Logos reflects the universe in the divine mind, and the manifested universe reflects itself in each of its monads, so the monad has, during the cycle of its incarnations, to reflect the root types of each kingdom. So the human kingdom then does not become the lower kingdoms as the life wave is going through those kingdoms getting experience, but that we reflect the root types of all of the other kingdoms in ourselves. So remove it from your minds that we have been insects and animals and worms. We have done none of that. The explanation is very clear that it's the monad or the life wave that is going through those experiences, and it doesn't make any difference to the monad as to which kingdom it is finding expression. It is the same essence. Its expression is different in each kingdom until it comes to the men kingdom. It does not become the kingdoms any more than a man going on a journey and observing all he views becomes what he sees. Now this is the background. Now we're moving on to how we obtain individuality. Again, Secret Doctrine 2, page 94. There are said to be various lunar pitris, or mindless men, the builders of the human form. So the lunar pitris could only give us what they had. What did they have? Their astral body, called Chaya in the Secret Doctrine, was projected and developed for our use, so that the physical atoms could arrange themselves on this plane of existence, giving us a physical existence where solidity exhibits itself. Okay? So, this is from the Secret Doctrine. The first reached the incipient human stage in round 1. Where are we now? Middle of the 4th round. So we have developed from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th. And we're going to go through 7 rounds. For this Manvantara, we have 7. We have 3.5 left. We have now moved a little bit further than the middle point of the 4th. In the most progressed of the lunar fathers, the 4 lower principles were combined in one as an active unity. But in the great bulk of them, it appears that only 3.5 principles were awakened. These mindless monads, says HPB, were of 7 classes, which indicate that they range all the way from 3-principled consciousness from the lower kingdoms coming towards men, with the faint touch of the 4th, which is the kamic principle, awake to its full expression. comma, awake or fully expressed. This is necessary for the mind principle, is it not? The lower mind at this stage works with our kamic principle. So if this is not developed, the fifth principle then is very rudimentary. This is important to bear in mind, for now we come to the period called in the theosophical history the lighting up of mind, which is the next process. And in the secret doctrine we are taught it took place 18 million years ago in the third root race, when that race divided into male and female, male and female, then men and women. Men will become gods and animals intelligent beings by the end of the seventh round. The great changes that are in store for our present higher animals appears implicit in Mr. Judge's statement. He answers the question of what happens to the monads of those animals who have exhausted the experience offered by our present animal types. The door to entry to the human kingdom being now closed. It closes at the midpoint of the fourth round. No others can enter the human kingdom in this manvantara. He says, animals cannot have manas so much developed as man does, and so cannot be self-conscious in the sense that man is. The animals being devoid of developed manas have no devakan and must be forced onwards to the next planet in the chain. This would be consistent and useful, as it gives them a chance for development in readiness for the time when the monads of that kingdom shall begin to rise to a new human kingdom. And this is quoted from Reincarnation of Animals, Theosophy, volume 540. Now, a statement from the Secret Doctrine. The monads which had not reached the human stage will, owing to the evolution of humanity itself, find themselves so far behind that they will reach the human stage only at the close of the seventh and last round. They will therefore not be men on this chain, but will form the humanity of a future manvantara. So, the animal kingdom then moves on to its next state, which is human. We're talking about the higher types that have developed these principles all the way and are ready to move, then will move into the human kingdom in at the end of the seventh round. Now, we talked about the lunar pitris giving their chaya for the development of our bodies, and that there were those who developed the kamic principle fully and those in whom it was just awakened. And she tells us the lunar pitris no doubt includes, in addition to the entities referred to, these, all those lives humanity used in the preceding evolutionary period and not yet not yet expressed. So, from this then we gather there were 7 classes of mindless men up to this point when the physical body was developed. It may be that there were 7 ways or variations in method of arousing to activity the latent mind principle. So what does that tell us? That the monad is complete in all of its aspects. It has to be developed because it has no link to our earth life. How does it get a link? Through the mind principle. So when the mind is latent, there is no higher aspect to the form itself. So, to give some inkling of the complex lines of karmic heredity coming to focus in this period of our history, a classification is offered to us. There are 7 classes. We will only discuss the 6 today, but the 7 we will go over. Number 1, first class, self-shining sages who were first to enter the mindless forms, those that were completely ready. Obviously, the kamic principle was totally integrated into the other 3 in the early 3rd race, and who later consciously produced through the power of Kriya Shakti an elect race. The power of Kriya Shakti is to produce from the mind, no physical activity, just mind activity. It shows how potent the mind is. In this race, in this elect race that was created through Kriya Shakti, even greater beings, great planetary guides could incarnate, and therein sound the keynote of truth for the coming human evolution. These great beings later withdrew, we are told, leaving the line of succession to lesser sages. This race of elect has never died, we are told. 3. Those who were self-conscious in previous manvantras and were helped by the elder brothers to incarnate in the waiting forms because they were not wise enough to do so unaided. 4. Those who were self-conscious in previous manvantras and were unable to completely incarnate, but rather overshadowed or projected a spark of lower manas into the forms that were almost ready. The complete trinity of Atma Bodhi manas did not incarnate in those. 5. Those who were self-conscious in prior worlds and who refused to incarnate, these are the rebels, delaying until the forms became corrupt, at which time they were forced to enter the forms, lest worst deterioration set in. So the forms were polluted, but nevertheless, through karmic impulse, they were by necessity made to incarnate in those forms. 6. This is the one that we need to pay attention to. Those incipient humans who were partially ready and whose latent mind principle was quickened by association with the foregoing classes. This class is said to constitute the majority of mankind today and represents the new crop of men. In prior manvantaras, they had risen to no higher life than that represented by the lower kingdoms. In the 5th round, they should reach the status of those in whom lower mind is now fully awake. Included in this class were also monads who, through misuse of their powers in the previous manvantaras, had lost their self-consciousness and had to go through all of the elemental kingdoms to gain fresh contact with life and earn a new chance. So this also tells us that this self-induced, self-devised effort that we talk about in our becoming more and more expressing of the divine in us is not an imaginary thing, because if we don't develop it if we don't go through the human stage and become humane, gyrating towards our root, which is divine, we can truly lose our self-consciousness, which is what these beings did in the previous mantra. So at the beginning of this one, they circled again through all of the other, the life wave, in other words, they had to go through that life wave again. 7. The lowest class of incipient humans, who in the latter part of the third round had just evolved from their transitional forms in the animal kingdom and were not ready. They could not receive even a spark. They represent the lowest class of primitive men on earth, whose mental powers are little above the animals, the aborigines. Now, we'll concentrate on the 6, the new crop of men who just had received what? A spark. This is majority of humanity on earth today. Again, referring to the unity, let us please remember that lighting up the mind is a process that is going on continuously, and it does different aspects in different kingdoms. At this time, that process is still going on in the other kingdoms, but there will be no passing off from the lower to higher until the end of the 7th round. So how then do we become self-conscious? She tells us that human self-consciousness represents but one of many stages in the power of becoming, because we're evolving continuously. And the third fundamental tells us that life marches towards a higher expression of itself. This process is a continuous process. It's not just in the human kingdom, it is in all of the kingdoms of nature. Theosophy regards ordinary egoism or personal self-awareness as but a transitional condition leading to a state of universal and intelligent awareness of the self of all, accompanied by appropriate responsibilities. So, self of all. This is where we're going. But egoity has to develop in us. We have to have self-awareness of ourselves. In the secret doctrine again, the sons of Mahat or mind, it is said that are the quickeners of the human plant. I'm directly quoting from the secret doctrine. They are the waters falling upon the arid soul of latent life and the spark that vivifies the human animal. They are the lords of spiritual life eternal. In the beginning, some of the lords only breathed of their essence into Manushya, men, and some took in men their abode. Okay, so this again shows us that some of them incarnated, but only if in few that were totally ready for that step. The remainder had their 5th principle simply quickened by the spark thrown into it. And had not the sons of mind so acted, the animal man would never have been able to reach upward from this earth and attain through self-exertion his ultimate goal, which is emancipation of the soul. So what does this sparking power mean then in us that was given to us? And well, actually there is no such as giving to us. A sparking power. We have to earn everything in life, so nothing is really given. Well, what does it mean to project a spark using the phraseology of the secret doctrine then? Well, it's an initiation process. But analogy also suggests that this is done just like our parents when they're raising us as children. What do they do to enlighten us, to give us information? Well, through association, education. Educo means to draw it out. So it's inherent in us, it needs to be drawn out. The monad has all of the knowledge within itself. It's the personality that has to become aware of it. So it has to be drawn from inside out. But the social environment helps do that. Our parents, for instance, do that through education by establishing bonds of sympathy. If you like it, you're more likely to do it, to put effort into it, than if you don't. And hero worship is another way where younger souls are inspired to follow in the footsteps of the older ones. And we talk about the masters, that great brotherhood. Well, they were like us at some one time, where that initial desire to become, to evolve to the divine life was so strong, but they had to make it start somewhere in someone's life, just like we are trying to. So they do understand, they know, and they're there to help when we have earned it. We have to earn it. So theosophical history tells us infant humanity was taught the eternal universal verities by its divine instructors. So those divine men who had overcome their lower selves and had reached this divinity were amongst us when we were incipient humanity, when we were just starting to express ourselves as human beings. They were there amongst us. They instructed us. Why? Because we were pure. We had no animosity, no ugliness. We hadn't had the experience of anything yet. So we could only express the divine aspect of ourselves at that time. So these ideas were said to have been burned into the mind of the nascent mankind. Could not this have been one of the chief methods of lighting up? Robert Crosby once asked, can we not conceive of an incipient humanity in its earliest stages of instructability being given by degrees the knowledge of those with mind? Universal Traditional States, HPB, shows primitive man living for ages together with his creators and first instructors. And these teachers, she tells us, revealed to the incarnated monads that had just shaken off their vehicles of the lower kingdoms and who had therefore lost every recollection of their divine origin, the great spiritual truths of the transcendental worlds. So it was burned into our minds, we were taught, we have forgotten. So we have to bring it forth to the forefront by the process that was talked about this morning by the first student. Well, I have finished with my time. I haven't finished with the talk. I can never make all these statements in such a short period of time, even if I try to. Okay, let's bring it to some sort of ending. So, secret doctrine. This is very important. So once the mind is awakened, it is through self-exertion that his ultimate goal is attained. And it deserves emphasis because without that, there is no achievement. She tells us that the study of the secret doctrine is not for lazy people. She really meant it because this self-exertion, this constant trying to understand it. What makes the difference for those students, because as we sit in meditation and ponder over these ideas, clarity comes. Any other way, clarity will not come, because the higher self can only contact the lower through the mind principle, as we made that statement. Two kinds of monads, Atma Buddhi and Atma Buddhi Manas. No lower than that can it come. So all of the information, if you like, or knowledge that it sifts through to the lower aspect has to come through the mind principle. It will be remembered that the third fundamental of the secret doctrine states that individuality is acquired first by natural impulse and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts. Elsewhere, the author of the secret doctrine, HPB, speaks, the sacred spark which burns and expands into the flower of human reason and self-consciousness has to become a flame. So the recipient of the gift has to nurture it. How does it become a flame? It's just like feeding the fire, right? So each class of the creators then endows man with what it has to give. One builds his external form, the lunar ancestors, the lunar pitris. The other gives him its essence. Later on, this essence is what becomes the human higher self, owing to the personal exertion of the individual. That came from Secret Doctrine 2, page 95. The higher self, the divine monad, exists alike in all beings, yet light on the path tells us he will not know thee unless thou knowest him. You have to make the effort first. The divine cannot exert itself on this plane of matter. If this be true of the higher self, it may likewise be true of manas, the higher mind, because remember, the higher mind is the divine mind, its essence is pure, and the higher mind is the seat of our individuality, we are told. So it may therefore take many, many incarnations of effort before a genuine sense of egoity is developed. Those who received only a spark have but an inadequate form of self-consciousness, because yet they are so confused with the impressions of the lower kingdoms. And this, all of us suffer from time to time. We say, what should I do? I really don't know what's the right thing to do. That is where this confusion comes from, because the impressions of the lower. The fact of self-consciousness is there, because I can say I am I can say who am I can say where did I come from, but until I answer it by saying whatever I am, I cannot be this body, we cannot emerge as egos. That self-realization that I am not the physical body and that I don't identify myself with it has to be there first.
Were you just quoting the secret doctrine or the creator on that?
Yes. It is all from the secret doctrine. It continues on that page. 95 onward. So, and then we are told there is no need for discouragement. The advance to human maturity, we are told, is very gradual, just as it is also to the divine stage. An individual at times can temporarily function at the other levels. When does that occur? When we transcend In meditation, we can definitely transcend. The initial awakening is continued by alchemical method of mixture, amalgamation, and precipitation. And in future, by reminding, and they wrote reminding this way, ourselves, reminding others. What does that do? We're imparting lives between the recipient or the correspondent, correct? So we're lighting up those constituent parts in the others. This is the spark we were talking about. This is the exchange that takes between those. Because we come into the company of men of all degrees of intelligence and morality. We receive from the higher ones what they have to offer, and the higher things in us we impart to them. This is the exchange process. And the time of precipitation, we're told, will come, and that biblical story about the separation of the sheep from the goats is no fantasy. There will come a day when we must make a self-conscious choice whether we're going to have immortal life in the spirit or extinguish our self-consciousness in matter, because this is the process. Mr. Judge again. This is from Meditation and Action, and I will simply just read it for finality. The sympathetic relief of physical suffering, he says, is well. The teaching by which man's mental horizon is widened and man's moral nature is elevated is better. But best of all is to become part of the spiritual pabulum by which humanity lives. Example. And the very first step on the path that leads to this stupendous result is meditation. In other words, the detachment displays itself by perfect equanimity in good and evil fortune, the centering of all thought on the Supreme, until thought itself drops off and the soul is face to face with deity. So that principle in the heart then shows itself, and the line between the upper and the lower is no longer there. The thought process has dropped. We have what? Direct vision. It will be apparent in the above that the service of man is the keynote throughout, because we are told charity, altruism, kindness, love, all this is very, very potent, and we must learn to express it. But the other side, which is expressed in regular parlance, worship of God, what is that? The acknowledgement of that deity in the heart for theosophical students, and assuming the position of the higher and working from that standpoint is just as important as the activity as to how we conduct ourselves through love, charity, and all those in service of humanity. When the self, as we understand it, is annihilated, when the soul has been able to endure the transcendent vision of itself as deity, when difference no longer exists and the one is merged in the all, the storehouse of spiritual energy is thereby replenished, and all humanity receives an impulse that raises them a step nearer the divine union also. Nay, further, the divine impulse, after passing through man, descends to vivify the lower creation. The whole universe is thrilled by it. The whole universe is thrilled by it. So that impulse that one of us achieves is a tremendous boon to the rest of humanity as well as all of creation. All of it feels it when one of us can become one with the all, which is the focal point of this talk, that we are on our way to emancipation, which means becoming one with the all. Now I will answer your question. I'm sorry, I couldn't finish it any earlier. Yes?
Yeah, comment and then a question. First is, the way this presentation was presented today, it sounds like it's all pure science, that science is not yet acknowledged except for a few possible exceptions like Einstein. Why is it that, and then I hear the secret doctrine is so hard to understand. This student is sitting back here, seemed to understand everything you said, and he doesn't consider himself to be a genius by any stretch of the imagination. Why is it that so many people say the secret doctrine is difficult to understand, and then they try to turn around and put their own spin on it, and their personalities get in the way, etc.? Well, I'm getting into the other part of it now. Why is it so? Bottom line is, why do we not see this message brought out much more than it is now? This book was written over 100 years ago, and HPV said she did nothing but put out what has been put out for eons, since forever, really. Why is it that we don't get it?
So your question is, why is it that students find the secret doctrine difficult today?
Well, that's part of the question, yes.
Well, we'll answer one part of it first, because your question is so loaded. First of all, what is it that we discussed today? That the monad cannot be on earth, the monad, because Atma Buddhi is of a spiritual plane, and it cannot exhibit itself here on earth but through the mind. First, we have to develop the intellectual mind, but the understanding of the secret doctrine depends on the divine mind. Here we go. Mind. This is the mind here contacting the lower, and it is through this contact that the lower is raised by information being sifted. But first, the quaternary has to aim upward, because it cannot know you until you know him, was the statement here. So there has to be a tendency in the human being's heart to want to know who or what he is, what he's made up of, and come to that point where it was expressed, I am not this body. In other words, do not identify yourself with the lower principles. By no chance can we ever elevate ourselves by assuming the position that we're the body. We have to assume the position of the higher. This turnabout has to come about, and it cannot be given to human beings from the outside. It's an inner initiation process that comes through understanding and effort in this direction. As we try to understand the philosophy, as we try to help all those around us to the best of our ability, as we try to teach what we have learned to others so that they can also move in the same direction, that process is what brings the higher mind into focus also, because that is also a divine principle. It is not of this earth. So once these energy centers in the brain are activated, then the sifting through occurs, and the personality is able to remember more and more. Number two, everywhere HPB states, if you need to understand these writings that come from the masters, do not read them with your physical eyes. What is she trying to tell us? Read it with your spiritual eyes. In other words, have no eyes.
Can't somebody just tell me what it means?
No.
It's a big book.
No, it doesn't work that way. These discussions is to create interest in the heart of the others so that they go and do their own research to see if what is being said sits correctly in their own heart. This is not dogma. She says it has to be made a living reality in you in order for you to understand what it really means. She says truth can only be approximated on paper, but can be understood when you sit in meditation. It imparts to you what it really means, what the book is saying. In other words, there's an underlying meaning to it that becomes clear to each one of us as we ponder as to what it really means. So that's the other process. And pretending to love, pretending does tremendous damage to us. We cannot pretend. If we have some hang-ups, we need to acknowledge them and work on them to remove them. We are all here because we obviously need to work on our lower aspects in some manner or other. So this is a slow process. And once we remove it from ourselves, it's removed from the family, it's removed from the community, and eventually when it gathers force, it's removed from our nation. What better chance to serve humanity? She tells us everywhere this is a very serious work we are involved in. It involves the whole Christian Western world, because we are not understanding what spirituality truly means, what brotherhood means, what equality is. So look at all of the turmoil that's going on in the world just to obtain freedom of thought, freedom of expression, which is the first step in this path. We have to allow people freedom of speech and freedom to choose. We cannot interfere with it. Yes?
The spark
Yes?
came to lighten man's mind. That was in the third race?
Yes? But that's concretizing it, because that process is still going on. Remember what we said about the spark and how it is passed on from one to the other? That we're in the company of men who have higher standards of morality and intelligence, and they impart it to us by osmosis kind of thing. That is the true way, actually, that this process takes place. It's not like they're giving us something. The mind principle is there in humanity, but it's latent, and to activate it requires that process. Learning, when you look at the animal kingdoms, birds, for instance, they know how to make their nests by instinct, and they make perfect nests. They're all circular. Circular. The nest is circular, and they build it because they learn it from one generation to the other. It's passed on, correct? Move on to a higher realm. The egg production changes in the mammalia. The mother takes care of the young. That is sacrifice, is it not? That is love. Because no animal will leave its baby there to die. Even when the baby is injured in the lion kingdom, the mother constantly goes back to check on the young one. So it is taught. You're learning it from your environment, family, community, and so forth. It's the same with the human kingdom. We just discussed it a little bit, did we not? It says, where was that? It says here that this intelligence is acquired in the human kingdom, because in the animal kingdom, mind is not active. Only in the human kingdom it is active. In this lower mind, when it is fully expressed, then it becomes prepared to receive impressions from the higher mind. Just like the comic principle, when it was fully ready, only then could we receive the fifth principle, which is the mind principle. But it is dormant in humanity. It did say, where were we? I read different things all from different places. It's very tough to find it again. Yeah, we did say here that the monadic or cosmic essence in the mineral, vegetable, animal, though the same throughout the series of cycles from the lowest elemental up to the Divi kingdom, yet differs in the scale of progression. Because they don't have the mind principle, they do things from instinct. Remember what we read from this here to 91? Remember this? That one principle is active in the mineral, it gives it polarity, negative, positive. In the plant, it gives it, informs the seed, vital and intelligent force enters it, and it gives it intelligence. Feeling. Sorry? Feeling also. Yeah, feeling also. And in the animal, it does the same, but it adds to it life principle and vital power, its instinct and qualities. Remember?
When you say it, you mean the monad? It?
Well, the animal kingdom is a unit monad. There is no individuality. They don't have the mind principle. There is only dog principle, lion principle. I mean, lion family, dog family, because their characteristics are different. Because they have unified, the soul principle is unified in them. They're not individualized yet. Only, she says, in the higher kingdom, this comes to a point. Actually, dogs and elephants are what she lists as the higher.
Those are monads.
No, they will become monads. It's almost there. In the seventh round, the animals of this Manvantara will move on to the human kingdom.
And that's when monads are
individualized.
Okay. All right. But it's only in the human kingdom that monads exist. Everything's a monad.
We had described the monads. There are two types of monads.
Okay.
Two types.
Mm-hmm.
One, what was it?
Atma Buddhi.
Atma Buddhi. And we'll just do it this way. Two, Atma Buddhi Manas. And this is the human kingdom. When the incipient man moves into the human kingdom, it is informed by its divine instructors, and that knowledge is imprinted, burned into our mind, so that we can retain that knowledge. Even if we forget it temporarily, it's still there. When the conditions are right, your sympathies are with your higher self, that knowledge is there. You can bring it forth because it's burned into your mind. It's burned into the mind of nascent humanity. Remember, we talked about it? And those instructors lived amongst the incipient humanity, because there was only goodness and purity, we could intermingle with them. Imagine we have been in evolution from the third 18 million years. That's a very long time. We have polluted our vehicles from ignorance.
You're saying they may still be with us, but they don't mingle with us.
They're not with us anymore. They have become planetary spirits, she tells us in the Secret Doctrine. They have moved on. Once they have taught us what we needed to know, the divine instructors removed themselves. However, the elect race is still amongst us. They have never disappeared. Remember, the sages created through Kriya Shakti an elect race. Who are those that were produced? The Kumaras are the virgin sons of Brahma. They are the mind beings who imparted the mind principle to men. So, some of them who were advanced from the previous Manvantara were forced to incarnate in the perfected vehicles. Some refused, and where did the pollution come? Pollution came in the Atlantean race, because we were still, I say we, because we, humanity of today, was the humanity of the previous races also. We recycle ourselves, we reincarnate in every race there is. So, she tells us that karmically, that was the heaviest karma humanity suffered was during the first race. In the third race, the mind was incipient. Even if it was awakened, it was not fully active. It takes processing to become, use the mind, in other words. So they committed crimes that would probably not be forgiven today, and nature got rid of it because they were still spiritual. But towards the end of it, the spirituality was declining. But in the Atlanteans, the third eye was still active. They knowingly abuse their spiritual powers. We are told that it was not a crime to use our physical aspects, but it was crime to pollute the spiritual aspects, to make the spiritual aspects the lower aspect, in other words, in us. Rather than lifting this physical, we made the higher polluted by our, well, one thing this student read in the Secret Doctrine is that they produced, because the lineages were not removed, they had relationships with the female animals, whatever that means. I have no idea. And they produced progeny that nature got rid of. They were all walking on fours like animals. I can't imagine what that is, but it is specifically written that the apes come from us, we do not come from them. A lower kingdom cannot produce such intelligence as we exhibit today, because we have been evolving many, many million years now. So, yes?
But doesn't the monarch go through all of the various kingdoms till it gets to the human kingdom? It go through the mineral kingdom?
We just said the life wave imparts different aspects of itself to that kingdom. Are you leaving us, John?
Yeah.
You got to go? You can't wait?
I got in late, but I did make it.
Okay. If you can't wait, see you next time.
The life wave. The life wave. What is that?
The life wave is the monadic essence. On page 289, we are told...
Book 1 or book 2?
1.
Okay.
We are told the life essence in its 7th state on the 7th plane is called the one life. This is Alaya, the soul of the universe. Okay?
The 7th plane.
the seventh plane, seventh state, which is a spiritual fluid. Now, can you imagine what that is? What is a spiritual fluid? This student cannot imagine it, because we are told it is only perceivable to the inner eye of the Mahatma. She tells us the seventh from one up down here is the highest that our sun expresses on earth. The highest is the sun, and it is not 7 at the top, but coming to 1. It's this that it expresses. The Dhyan-Chohanic host, our spiritual progenitors, are on the 5th Rasi division. Okay? So there are 4 levels higher than the physical sun. But the physical sun is only an aperture that reflects the spiritual sun behind it. So it's controlled at an archaic level. The sun is not iridescent. It does not give out heat. It simply is a window that reflects the archaic reality behind it and moves it into this world through itself. And the Dhyan-Chohans, according to HPB in the Secret Doctrine, are the rays that the sun radiates out of itself. She tells us, which this article is very important to understand, because it really tells us something about the evolutionary process. She tells us here,
On page
290, book 1, the real substance of the concealed sun is the nucleus of mother substance. It is the heart and matrix of all the living and existing forces in our solar universe. It is the kernel from which proceed to spread on their cyclic journeys all the powers that set in action the atoms in their functional duties, and the focus within which they again meet in their 7th essence every 11th year. This is an observed fact by science. He who tells thee he has seen the sun, laugh at him, as if he had said that the sun moves really onward on its diurnal path. It's the earth that does the movement. The 7 beings in the sun, the Dhyan-Chohanic host, are the 7 holy ones, self-born from the inherent power in the matrix of mother substance. It is they who send the 7 principal forces called rays, which at the beginning of Pralaya will center into 7 new suns for the next Manvantara. The energy from which they spring into conscious existence in every sun is what some people call Vishnu or deity, which is the breath of the absoluteness. Because we cannot see it, we cannot perceive it, we say it is empty, our world. But even science is coming to understand that there is tremendous movement in our universe that underlies the surface activity of the universe. So first, intellectually, we must put it in. We must understand what the Secret Doctrine says. Then when we sit in meditation, who are the Dhyan-Chohans? How am I to know my spiritual progenitors? I am part of them. I come from them. I have divinity from them. They give me each one of my powers. One of the levels of consciousness comes from them, which then divides itself into 7, giving us 49 fires, which are equivalent to 49 degrees of levels of consciousness. I'm sorry, I'm lecturing now. Because you asked the question, I go all over the place.
Is number 1, is that physical level? Is it the physical plane? And number 7 is the spiritual plane?
Number 1 is the sun. Now, what do you know about the sun? Nothing. Science does not know anything about the sun. What they tell us is not what it is. You need to read the secret doctrine for yourself.
So number 7 is
the highest. When that energy, the spiritual fluid, when it is on the 7th plane, in its 7th highest level, it is referred to as the one life, which constitutes alaya, the soul of our universe. It's everywhere. The spiritual fluid is everywhere, and it is for creative purposes only. So it is one removed from the absolute, but nevertheless it expresses it within itself, because it is not separate from the absolute. It is projected into space through the absolute. It's still, the root is still there, and it's projected into time and space.
Could you say that's the circumference of the circle?
That's the spiral from not the circle. We are moving it all the time.
She says that's one. The surface of the circle is defined as alaya. The surface.
The surface.
You had a question. I'm sorry, let me answer Andra's question and I'll come back to you. Andra, you had a question or a comment?
I'm trying to figure out what my question is. Oh my.
Why didn't you turn that off?
Are you done?
I don't know. Am I done?
Let's get Andrew's question.
Let's have some strawberries. If you remember your question, I'm happy to answer it.
Okay.
I'm answering. I want Veer to understand what he's asking, but have some strawberries, everybody.
You mentioned that the animal kingdom
Yes.
only functions as one. It's not individual.
Right.
Right. And yet we're asked and invited as humans, you know, in the human body, to have a consciousness and to constantly be told that we are all one and to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible that the animal kingdom in that sense might be more advanced than us?
Perhaps you can say that. The student, when we look at the bees and ants, they have a tremendously structured lifestyle, but they are not selfish. They only take what they need, and each unit works for the harmony of the whole nest. So perhaps what you're saying is expressed through instinct better in them. But when humanity reaches the incipient human stage and is instructed, it is also given the choices. It is the prerogative of each human being, as we move towards individualization more and more, to choose for ourselves, that our rights must not be interfered with. Even in the Gita, after Krishna explains the whole process to Arjuna, he says, do as best seems unto thee. He doesn't say, let me make up your mind and tell you what you need to do. He says, make a choice. This never must be interfered with. So through that choice, if we make the wrong choices, what happened to us? Our errors increase from life to life, and our debt to humanity and all of nature increases. Our environment then is provided for us as an opportunity to grow to a higher state of expression, as well as bring the discordancy that we had created into harmony. So as that process is finding expression, we also become forgetful of the root, especially the West, because of the dogmatic um, religious and also the school system teaching us that we are individualized, and we are constantly bombarded with self-expression, whereas in the East, even in the school, cooperative living and cooperative assistance is encouraged. Now, a little bit of that has been started in the West too, because we are now finding out that what we have been doing does not really work, because there's a lot of people out there who are saying it is my responsibility to give back to society because I have been given so much. But what it looks like you're being given is not really given. It's something that you have earned. However, how you use it in this life will project itself in the circumstances of the next life. It will determine how and where and when you're going to come back and recycle yourself according to your behavior in this one. The morality, which is not a code to be followed, but an inherent quality in the center, because the whole humanity comes from love and equality, because the center gives to all of its units the same. It does not differentiate. Just like the sun shines on everything, it doesn't differentiate. This part is dirty, this part I'm not going to give light to. It's the same. That core, the essence, which is this one life, which is everywhere, it doesn't differentiate between its units. So human beings are the ones that differentiate. So as we learn to move in that direction and express the core again, we learn that we truly are a brotherhood and there is no separation, because this energy is this way, or you can do this, and we are each a dot. And she says our immortality can only be achieved in conjunction with all of the other dots. Yes?
Okay, so when we talk about the human being more advanced, let's say, than the animal kingdom, the animal kingdom being more advanced than the mineral kingdom, there's so much to be learned from nature. They say, as in heaven, so in the earth, whatever.
As above, so below.
As above, so below. So if we observe nature and can learn from the, let's say, perfection of nature, from the forests, from the bees, from the ants, and observing how they relate, you know, it's almost like wisdom is embedded there, and yet humans consider themselves more advanced than trees and plants and the animals and the bees and the ants. Do you see what I'm saying? We as humans can learn better how to relate to each other in the way that ants, let's say, take what they need and bees take what they need, and so greed is not part of their system. And yet we can profit from that purity and that simplicity. It's almost as though they have the wisdom that we haven't yet imbibed.
You cannot look at it that way, because the monadic essence gives of itself a particular aspect to each kingdom. Only in the human kingdom are we self-conscious. All of the lower kingdoms will reach this state at some time. The humanity is the highest, because when you look at it, the expression comes to a point in the human kingdom because we are self-conscious. And
bottom line is we are relearning what the ants already know through instinct.
You have it. You have instinct.
But I have to bring it to
you have instinct, but you also have this karma developed fully in you, which is our passions and desires. With the lower mind, with the lower personality, this is the most developed aspect. It's a stage we're going through. We must learn our lessons through this stage as well as all the others. Humanity is the point all the rest of the kingdoms are looking up to, because they are going to become that. Just like we have reached it, that's what they're working towards also. And if we listen to the core is based on love, understanding, sharing, kindness, unity, brotherhood. This is the natural expression of humanity. What we see around today is an abnormal expression of extreme materialism and extreme selfishness, which HPB tells us at this stage of our development, it is totally abnormal and against every moral grain that we have in us.
Should we call time and turn
Yes,
this off?
thank you. Thank you, everyone. I will talk to you more.
Did you